Beach in New Zealand. Hope you're all having a super fantastic, sparkling day. Welcome to Porchlight Letters podcast number 2522. Where was your family when you moved house for the first time? Yes, one of those things that eventually happen. Now, some people are lucky enough to be born and raised in one house. Others have moved several times. I have lived in 15 different towns and cities within New Zealand from one end of the country to the other. I have been to 9 different schools, 6 elementary, 2 middle schools, and 1 high school. I moved to the States and I lived in Virginia. I lived in Los Angeles, Rancho Bernardo. I've forgotten the name of the beach I lived by. So, what was the name of the beach? It's in San Diego. Solana Beach. Before I moved into an RV and started tripping around the country and ending up in Arizona, Arizona for the last 2.5 years that I was in the States. So I have moved a lot. A lot. What do I know about moving? A lot. But moving house is more than changing your address. It can change the course of a family's story. Some families, it meant new jobs, new opportunities. For others, it meant leaving behind friends, neighbors, and a home filled with memories. Sometimes it was a move just across town. Other times it meant a move. It meant a new city, a new country, or a completely new different way of life. And trust me, when you move country, there is a completely different way of life that comes with that. If you were a child, the move may have meant starting at a new school, making new friends, learning your way around an unfamiliar neighborhood. You might remember packing boxes, saying goodbye to your old home, or wondering what your new bedroom would look like. Those experiences often stayed with us for a lifetime. Looking back through your family history, you may discover that one move changed everything. Everything, I tell you. It may have led to a new career, introduced your parents or grandparents to lifelong friends, or even brought 2 people together who would never have met otherwise. Romance stories. I love those ones, especially the true ones. One decision to move can shape generations that follow. The homes we leave behind become part of our story, just as the places we move to become the backdrop for new memories. Every address tells a chapter of our family's journey. Yeah. So me moving, well, I can tell you lots of different things. I don't remember the first house we lived in because I was a baby. I was brought home to it as a baby. I've got photographs of it. And I've heard the stories my mum and dad have told me about living there. We moved from there to Te Awamutu. I don't remember any of our time there. Then we moved to Papatoetoe. I remember that place. I remember the carport outside the front door. I remember this little bike I used to ride around on. Then we moved from there, but I don't remember the moves. We moved from there to Manurewa, and we had a house there. I can draw you the floor plan of that house. Some things just stick in your head. And I was there. I started school there. That was when I went to kindergarten and school from there. And then we moved from there down to Invercargill. Now, Invercargill is the most southern city in New Zealand. It is right down the bottom of the South Island. I actually experienced my first snow in Invercargill. I remember that night clearly. Mum was in the kitchen and Dad had just finished his shift at the firehouse. He was a fireman at the time, and had come home. And Mum had given him dinner, and she was standing at the kitchen counter cutting bread. And she looks up out of the window and goes, "Why is the fence white?" And I was running around in my PJs, and my brother and I were running around in our PJs. And our youngest brother was in bed asleep, and Dad's sitting in the dining room area just next to the kitchen. And Mum goes, why is our fence white? And I looked up and went, what do you mean? And she goes, it's snowing. And we're going, snow? And my brother and I went, what's snow? And so she opens up the ranch slider door so we could go out onto the back porch. And sure enough, these white flakes were falling out of the sky. It was so cool. And we're out there in our PJs, running around in our PJs and our slippers. I don't even know if we had our robes on or not. But the next morning we go out, and there is this thin layer of ice that's sitting on top of the grass blades. And I thought, this is so cool. And so I put my first foot, found a place in the grass on the edge of the curb there, put my foot down and brought it straight back up. And the ice broke around the edge of it, but underneath you could see all the grass standing up. It was the coolest thing. And so then I was placing my next foot, put it down, bring it up, put it down, bring it up, so that I wouldn't misshape the thing. So there was my footprint, my shoe prints exactly as they were in the thing, and I was making sure they stayed. That was the first time I saw in Invercargill. That was the first time seeing snow and the last time seeing snow in Invercargill. Years later, we got to experience snow later on, but that's another story for another day. Everywhere we went, we had to change. And after our first school up in Manurewa, we were then changing schools every time we moved. We were only in Invercargill for like 10 months, but I did 2 schools there. 2 schools, yes. We lived with my aunt. We stayed with my aunt and uncle for a while, while mum and dad found a place for us to live, and bought the place. And then, so I was going to the same school. My aunt was a teacher, and so she taught at the school. So I would go to the school with her every day and come home with her in the afternoons. And then we moved into our own place, and then I had to go to a different school. So we're now into 3 schools. Then we went from there to Porirua, where again I went. Walk uphill both ways to school at that place. Then a school opened that was closer to us, and so we walked uphill and downhill to it each day. And it opened in January. We do a full year school in New Zealand here. So we opened like the last week of January, first week of February. This one was the last week of January. We opened, the 6th of January was Waitangi Day, and we had this, and Wellington is known for wind. It's called Windy Wellington for a reason. I have even met a guy from Chicago who was struggling along Stout Street, hanging onto the ropes that were there between the parking meters. Yes, it was that windy. He had to hold onto the rope between parking meters, and he had a full backpack on, and he was walking along, and I go, "You doing okay?" He says, "Yeah." He said, "I thought we had some winds in Chicago." So apparently our winds were stronger than Chicago, until he came to Wellington, and that sort of like, Chicago's more of a breeze. But anyway, but the winds were so strong that our school was brand new, and we had a couple of prefab classrooms that had been sitting on the things. I don't know if they hadn't been tied down yet or whatever, but that whole classroom block blew over. And that was on a Thursday. I meant to go to school on Friday. And so we ended up having this nice long weekend. When we got back to school on Monday, they had cleared the classrooms that got blown over. They brought in new classrooms, tied them down to the pilings that were there, and were ready for us to go in. But they said, you got to be careful when you're out in the fields playing, because there could still be broken glass and nails. If you find any, bring them to the teachers so that we know. And so we would do that. 3 grades. I'm going to call them grades. It was like, probably on standard 1, standard 2, standard 3, and standard 4. They're now called years. I've got no idea which years they relate to. But we now have 13 years at school. We start at year 1 when you're 5 and you leave when you're 18. But we had 3 different grades, for a better word, in that classroom. And we had one teacher who was Dutch, and he taught us to say good morning and good afternoon in Dutch. I can't do it now, totally forgotten. And then some of our lessons we learned Dutch in order to do the lessons. We were learning about the Black Plague in Europe. And so we would speak some Dutch during that time. It was really cool. He was a really cool teacher, Mr. Bacher. Really cool teacher. Then I left partway through that year to move to Fielding, where I went to another elementary school. So that was my 6th elementary school, if you're keeping count. Then I started my first middle school while we were there. We call them intermediates here. And then we moved from there up to Waitara, moved up there, and I finished my first year of intermediate there, and my second year of intermediate. We're going to do 2 years at the middle school. And then I started high school, and I stayed there in high school. It was the longest place in New Zealand I have ever lived. I lived in that town for 6 years. It was a very strange feeling to be living in one place for 6 years. And then I went from there into the Air Force. So there was my 6 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and 1 high school. What does that have to do with moving house? I had to move house every time. And I remember bits and pieces of different moves, and some I remember nothing at all of the moves. I do, though, remember that my mother always taught me, when it came to moving, is that you would have the essentials in the car. So in the car, you would have with you the jug to make the coffee, plates, knives and forks and spoons, cups, coffee, tea, what was some of the other, whatever essentials that you needed at the time. So that when you got to your new house, and you had the bedding with you, the bedding as well. Because I think we always had a trailer on the back. I know we had a trailer on the back in one of them, at least one of them. And you had bedding. So you had the stuff to make up the beds for everybody. And then when the movers came in that day, the first thing you did once the movers were finished is you went and made all the beds. So if nothing else got done that day, you had the box of essentials that you could sit down and eat a meal, make a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and you had beds to sleep. Everything else got done after that. And that's kind of how things went. But mum was really unpacked and sorted and that sort of stuff. So she was really good at that. Me, not so much. I don't like moving. I really don't. To me, it's a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety, a lot of overwhelm. It depresses me when I've got to get rid of stuff that I know I could sell, but nobody wants to buy, that I could get a good price for it if I sold it, but nobody's buying. So I get depressed about that because, really good furniture, really good electronics, that sort of stuff. But just nobody was buying. So moving, and then of course it was always into new neighborhoods. Were there kids in our neighborhood that we could learn and become friends with and play with? Some areas we had were good for that. We made friends at school, and it was new school. And of course, you're walking into this room and everybody's been friends for a lifetime, and you come in and you're the odd man out for a bit until you start blending in. But just as you start getting to that point where you've got the friends, everything's going smoothly, we uprooted and moved again. That's why I didn't like moving. I had to leave friends behind. Some of them I had really, really good friends, and other ones not so much. But we never stayed in touch. We weren't taught that, to stay in touch. So there was always those moves, the new houses, the new neighborhoods. Then, of course, having to go to new churches. We had to go to, every time we moved, we had to go find a new church to go to. And so they're making friends in Sunday school and that sort of thing as well. And mum and dad having to fit into the communities that we were now in, and dad with his job, he's starting a new job in this area. Sometimes there was a couple of times he went ahead of us and would be living in that area and working while we got everything packed up and that sort of thing, and got the movers in and that, but he would come home for the moving part. But he would start at his new job, so he was able to get ingrained into his new job before the family arrived, type of thing. But it was always new communities, new people, new things, and trying to fit in. We had a really good girl guide group in Fielding, and I really enjoyed that group. When we moved up to Waitree, there was a girl guide thing there, but I just wasn't able to get into it. And that's when I moved to St. John's. And St. John's Ambulance is a free ambulance service that we have here in New Zealand. And they still have, or maybe still have, a youth program where you're taught basic first aid skills, CPR skills. You're taught when you come across an accident, how you evaluate who you deal with first. If you are dealing with a patient in bed, how to bathe them while they're in bed, how to change the sheets while they're in bed, all sorts of just basic care and that sort of stuff, which for me, years later, when Brad was in hospital for 21 days, came in very handy because I was able to change his dressings, change his ileostomy stuff, even do his bed changes for him, get him in new gowns, give him a bed bath. I was able to do all of that stuff for him, which took a lot of weight off the shoulders of the nurse. In fact, I was just talking about this morning. Took a lot of weight off the shoulders of the nurses. And they would argue over who got to look after Brad that day because they knew it was going to be an easy day with me because they just have to go and give him his medication and change the IV, and the rest of the stuff I did. And I wrote everything up on the board so they could come in and they could see what was done and any fluid outputs into the little containers that he had attached to his body at the time. We would have to record the output and all that sort of stuff. So I've got several job offers while I was at the hospital. So no, I only have one patient and that's him. I even had one matron or sister, I guess she would have been equivalent to, who even offered to personally, if I came on board, she would personally train me and I would personally work with her. And she was awesome. She was amazing. She was one of the really cool nurses that we had. And I went, sorry, I only have one patient. So that was some of the stuff that I went through with that. But getting ingrained, what was it like for you moving into a new neighborhood? How long did it take you to make friends? What was the new neighborhood like compared to your old neighborhood? Because you are going to do, and it doesn't matter because you are going to do comparisons. I can tell you right here and now you're going to do comparisons. How was your room? Was it better than the room you had? Was it okay? Was it really cool? Did you have a really cool view out the window? Did you have to share your room? What type of things did you, when you moved house, what were some of the things that you did as rituals for moving houses? And how did you fit into the new community, the new careers, meeting new friends? Maybe family members were now in the area and they were closer to you. Did you spend more time with them? So your family tree, your today's family tree challenges: ask a family member about the first time they remember moving house. Why did they move? Did they have to change schools? Was it across town, across town, cross country, cross state, in a completely new different country? What do you remember most about their old homes, or homes that they lived in? What do they remember about their neighborhood and the day that they moved? And just write down some notes and stories and things about moving day while it's still fresh. What was it like? And I remember in one place in Waitara, we actually stayed in a motel for a few days until our house was ready. I don't recall it being that long, but I don't know how long it was. I know it was a few days. I don't know if it was a week or 2 weeks. I don't know. I'd have to ask my mum that. But I remember we lived in a motel unit for a while. Didn't have a lot of space. I'm not even sure if we were on school holidays or if school was in session, if I went to school from there. But my school was kind of across the road and up the hill. Was where my school was at that point at the motel. It's a bit of a long walk once you moved into the house. But what do you remember about your moves, about the neighborhoods you moved into? Did you have some that were the favorites? Did you have some that were hard to leave? What was that like doing? What about your bedrooms? What type of bedrooms did you have? What different things did your family do when they moved to the new towns and things to get to know their way around? So let us know in the comments below some of your thoughts and memories about that. And with that, we are out of here. Go out, have a super fantastic, sparkling evening, and we'll catch you guys back here tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Pacific. Hey, konara.